To best understand this very striking confrontation that I had with a missionary on the streets of New York, some background is necessary. I was floating up Fifth Avenue, in a sense, literally. I was on a float in the Israel Day Parade. The following day, I made Aliyah, moved to Eretz Yisrael. As I'm going up Fifth Avenue, because that's how the parades go, somewhere in the 70s along Fifth Avenue, I noticed that on the east side, there's this guy with this huge sign. You couldn't miss it. It read, Google it, Isaiah chapter 53, cover up. As it turns out, I knew exactly what message that sign was conveying. My sense was I didn't think many other people did. What was he referring to? First, as it turns out, missionaries use a whole wide range of verses, passages from the Jewish scriptures, which they insist demonstrate that Jesus is the promised Jewish Messiah as a fulfillment of the Jewish scriptures. The most cited passage in all of the Hebrew Bible is Isaiah 53. And Isaiah 53 is used so frequently that it's really hard to have a conversation with the missionary without that coming up very quickly. Isaiah 53 describes in vivid detail the suffering servant who they argue is the Messiah. Now here is the rub. Missionaries insist that, in fact, the Jews are very well aware of the fact that Isaiah 53 is referring to Jesus. Rabbis knew this passage is pointing to Christ, and rabbis don't want their congregants believing in Jesus, so they expunged it from the Haftarah. They're covering it up. It's a very serious charge, and I need to explain what that means. So throughout the year, on each Shabbat, we read a portion of the Torah so that we finish the entire year cycle. The entire 5 books of Moses is read publicly in the synagogue. Each Shabbat is another portion of the Torah. Along with the reading of the Torah, immediately following the public recital, we read from a portion of the prophets, not the Torah part, not the 5 books of Moses, but the prophetic part of the Jewish scriptures, that middle, very large section of the Hebrew scriptures. Missionaries argue, are you ready for this? That the rabbis deliberately skip over Isaiah 53 and expunge Isaiah 53 from that Haftorah, from that prophet reading that is recited immediately after the Torah. And the rabbis deliberately hid Isaiah 53 from the Haftorah because, well, we don't want Jews to believe in Jesus. It's a very serious charge because the charge suggests not just that the Jews don't believe in Jesus, but deep down we do, but deny him anyway, and only the devil can do that. It's a charge that poisons the mind of those who hear it and know little about it. Okay, so that's where the cover-up comes in, because if you buy any Tanakh Hebrew Bible, you're going to find the book of Isaiah in it, and all 66 chapters are there. What they're saying is, we read through all 5 books of Moses throughout the reading cycle of the year on each Shabbat. That reading is followed by a reading from the prophets, and we just don't read Isaiah 53 because the rabbis conspired to ensure that Jews don't get baptized. That's what this guy meant. Now, before we watch that video, a little background is necessary. The ignorance that people have about what Jews do in their synagogue worship. I'm afraid to say that it's not just non-Jews who are unfamiliar with synagogue worship. Tragically, many Jewish people know little about the faith they're being asked to abandon. I'll explain. The tradition of reading from a portion of the prophets each Shabbat following the reading of the Torah is really quite ancient and goes back roughly 2,200 years to the time of Antiochus Epiphanes IV. He was a very evil character. He was the king of the Seleucid Empire. He ruled from 175 to 164 BCE. He's notorious because he's the villainous personality in the story of Hanukkah. He banned the practice of the Jewish faith. He did everything possible to destroy Judaism. In some ways, he can be characterized as the true anti-Semite, but not destroying the nation physically as Haman sought, rather to destroy Judaism utterly and to Hellenize the Jewish people entirely. One of the many things that he did to ban the Jewish faith was to prohibit circumcision, but also to prohibit the reading of the Torah, of the 5 books of Moses, not the prophets. Not books like Joshua or Isaiah or Jeremiah or Ezekiel. He banned the reading of the 5 books of Moses. Eventually, the Maccabees, this priestly family, would revolt and they would defeat the Seleucid Empire and restore the practice of Judaism, and that's celebrated with the festival of Hanukkah. So the Jewish people were faced with a conundrum, unable to read from the Torah publicly during this period, but they were allowed to read from the prophets. So what they did was they read from a portion of the prophets that closely correlated to the core message of what would have been that portion of the week. The point is, a very tiny percentage of all the prophets are read in the synagogue on Shabbat. It's something in the order of about 2% of all the prophets are read. Meaning, the argument suggests that the Jews just read all the prophets, and we just happen to skip Isaiah 53 because we're terrified of Jews getting baptized. This is a very silly argument, and it's a very dangerous argument because it characterizes the Jews as a banal, demonic people. For example, we don't read from Isaiah chapter 13 or 23. Those chapters are also not read in the synagogue on any Shabbat because those chapters don't comport with any portion of the Torah. And it's a very small number of passages that are actually read during the year. So the reason why Isaiah 53 isn't read in the Haftarah is the same reason why Isaiah 13 isn't read from the Haftarah, because it doesn't comport with any portion of the Torah. Moreover, this argument is so transparently foolish because the tradition of reading the Haftarah predates Christianity, meaning the assignment of these portions of the prophets were assembled before the Christian era, nearly 200 years before Christianity. Moreover, the reading of the Haftarah is mentioned a number of times in the Christian Bible. In fact, Jesus, we're told in the book of Luke chapter 4, went into a synagogue on the Sabbath. Jesus himself read from a scroll from the book of Isaiah, meaning no one had a reason to extract Isaiah 53 150 years before Christianity. That's how silly this argument is. Now, as it turns out, this charge is not only devoid of merit, it's really quite the reverse. The Jews don't hide any chapter of the Bible. We read the Bible in the original Hebrew. That can't be said for the church. I want to avoid the Hebrew part, but I want to focus on the passage part. As it turns out, it is Christians, it is the church that hides chapters in the Bible. Or in another way, it is the church that selectively teaches certain chapters of the Bible to parishioners. Meaning, if you ask an evangelical Christian, I'm not talking about liberal Catholics like the former mayor of New York, who's a nominal Roman Catholic. I'm not talking about him. I'm talking about fundamentalist evangelical Christians. I don't mean fundamentals in any disparaging way, but these folks memorize Isaiah 53. They know that chapter backwards and forwards by heart. They know Isaiah 9. They know Isaiah 7. But what they don't know is the chapters that surround it. All the other chapters of Isaiah, if you asked a Christian missionary, what does it say in Isaiah 52? In Isaiah 54, the answers are going to go something like, I need a Bible to look it up. Well, why do you need a Bible to look it up? Because you only know Isaiah 53. So it's really the reverse. Christians are just selectively taught. They're actually given communications cards that have just these verses that need to be memorized, and they don't know the verses that introduce these passages. And context is always determinative in Tanakh. Moreover, when it comes to Isaiah 53, the chapters that surround that passage are vital to understanding the 53rd chapter. I mean, imagine any book that had 66 chapters. It doesn't have to be a holy book. If you took any book in the world that had 66 chapters and skipped the first 52, what is the likelihood that you'd have any idea what's going on in the 53rd chapter? Not high. Well, as it turns out, Isaiah 53 is the fourth of four servant songs. Well, who is the servant? We're told that in the chapters that introduce Isaiah 53. Look, people can argue about many things, but one point is axiomatic. Isaiah certainly presupposed that if you're reading Isaiah 53, you've read the chapters that introduce it. Well, as it turns out, if you read, for example, Isaiah 41, verse 8 and 9, Isaiah 43, verse 10, Isaiah 44, verse 1, 44, verse 21, 45, verse 4, 48, verse 20, 49, verse 3. You see where I'm going with all this? In all these chapters that introduce Isaiah 53, we are told explicitly that the servant is Israel, is the nation of Israel, not all the Jews, the righteous remnant of the Jewish people, who are called to be a light to the nations, see Isaiah 42, verse 6, Isaiah 49, verse 6, and to call back the lost tribes of Jacob, meaning those Jews who are not observant. Meaning, the chapters that introduce Isaiah 53 consistently identify the servant as the nation of Israel. These are poetic chapters. Isaiah infrequently uses standard prose in these chapters. This is not like reading Samuel and Kings. It's poetic, very dense language. And the nation of Israel is spoken of in the singular as the nation is spoken of throughout Tanakh, because we not only have a singular history, but we have a unique and singular destiny. So the chapters that surround Isaiah 53 are enormously important to understand the identity of the suffering servant. Why? Because it identifies who the servant is. Now for our story. I'm going up Fifth Avenue, up in the air on top of this float. I'm looking over and I see that this guy with this huge sign, Google it. To this day, I never Googled it, but I know what he means. Isaiah chapter 53 cover-up. Well, as you can imagine, I didn't just get off the float. I jumped off the float, put my cell phone on video, and I asked him that question. Watch what happens. Let me just see this. This is amazing. Do you belong to a certain church? Is there a church that you belong to? Do you belong to a special church? Huh? This is amazing.
Jews for Jesus.
Jews for Jesus. Brilliant. Do you know what it says in Isaiah? Do you know what it says in Isaiah 54? What does it say there? In Isaiah 52?
I got into an argument with somebody. The cops told me don't get into Bible verses.
All right.
I think 52 all the way to 54 is the suffering servant.
Well, what does it say in 54?
Whole chapter, man. I'm not going into it right now.
It's a whole chapter.
Whole chapter.
Do you know what it says in 53? So 53 you know, but 52 and 54 you don't know.
No, I'm all.
You know, what does it say in 54?
I don't get fucking interviews, okay? So
all right.
Leave me the fuck alone.
All right.
Well, the guy standing on the street with a sign, you figure you give an interview.
Why don't you just move? On 8:44.
John 8:44. To calling us the Jews the seed of the devil. John 8:44 says that the Jews are the seed of the devil. So that was a very interesting engagement. And as it turns out, of course, he had no idea. He had no idea because Christians are not taught these chapters. That doesn't mean there isn't some studious Christian that reads through it, but they just study Isaiah 3 over and over again, completely out of context. This guy was a little bit more belligerent than most missionaries are, but this will help you know how to introduce the chapter. Just ask, what does it say in the chapter before? What does it say in the chapter after? They have no idea. Now let's hope that they should learn not just Isaiah 53, not just Isaiah 7, not just Isaiah 9, but all 66 chapters. Because if they learned all 66 chapters, they will join the faith of Israel, and then the Mashiach, the true Messiah, will come quickly in our time. Thank you.
אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא